the best we had, and they believed in their training. They were the ones who slashed back the deepest when the other side hit us. They were the ones who sallied out into the doomed spaces between the stars and took the war to the other side as well as any human force could ever hope to. They were always the last to leave an abandoned position. If Earth had been giving medals to members of her forces in the war, every man in the Corps would have had the Medal of Honor 2 or 3 times over, posthumously. I don't believe there were 10 of them left alive when Cope was shot. Cope was one of them. They were a kind of human being neither Macready nor I could hope to understand. You don't know, Mac said. It's there, in his duffel. Damn it, we're going out to trade with his sworn enemies. Why do you suppose he wanted to sign on? Why do you suppose he's so eager to go? You think he's going to try to start something? Think? That's exactly what he's going for. One last big alley fight. One last brawl. When they cut him down, do you suppose they'll stop with him? They'll kill us, and then they'll go in and stamp Earth flat. You know it as well as I do. I don't know, Mac, I said. Go easy. I could feel the knots in my stomach. I didn't want any trouble. Not from the Stoker, not from Mac. None of us wanted trouble, not even Mac. But he'd cause it to get rid of it, if you follow what I mean about his kind of man. Mac hit the viewport with his fist. Easy! Easy! Nothing's easy. I hate this life, he said in a murderous voice. I don't know why I keep signing on. Mars to Centaurus and back and forth in an old rust tub that's going to blow herself up one of these. Daniels called me on the phone from communications. Turn up your intercom volume, he said. The Stoker's jamming the circuit. I kicked the selector switch over, and this is what I got. So there we were at 1,000,000 per, and the air was getting thick. The captain said, cheer up, brave boys, we'll... He was singing. He had a terrible voice, but he could carry a tune, and he was hammering it out at the top of his lungs. 'Twas the last cruise of the Venus, by God you should have seen us. The pipes were full of whiskey, and just to make things risky, the jets were... The crew were chuckling into their own chest phones. I could hear Daniels trying to cut him off, but he kept going. I started laughing myself. No one's supposed to jam an intercom, but it made the crew feel good. When the crew feels good, the ship runs right, and it had been a long time since they'd been happy. He went on for another 20 minutes. Then his voice thinned out, and I heard him cough a little. Daniels, he said, get a relief down here for me. Jump to it. He said the last part in a master's voice. Daniels didn't ask questions. He sent a man on his way down. He'd been singing, the Stoker had. He'd been singing while he worked with one arm dead, one sleeve ripped open and badly patched because the fabric was slippery with blood. There'd been a flashover in the drivers. By the time his relief got down there, he had the insulation back on, and the drive was purring along the way it should have been. It hadn't even missed a beat. He went down to sick bay, got the arm wrapped, and would have gone back on shift if Daniels had led him. Those of us who were going off shift found him toying with the theremin in the mess compartment. He didn't know how to play it, and it sounded like a dog howling. Sing, will you? Somebody yelled. He grinned and went back to the good ship Venus. It wasn't good, but it was loud. From that we went to Starways, Farways, and Barways, and the Free Fall song. Somebody started I Left Her Behind for You, and that got us off into sentimental things, the way these sessions would sometimes wind up when spacemen were far from home. But not since the war, we all seemed to realize together. We stopped and looked at each other, and we all began drifting out of the mess compartment. And maybe it got to him too. It may explain something. He and I were the last to leave. We went to the bunk room, and he stopped in the middle of taking off his shirt. He stood there looking out the porthole, and forgot I was there. I heard him reciting something softly under his breath, and I stepped a little closer. This is what it was. The rockets rise against the skies, slowly in sunlight gleaming, with silver hue upon the blue, and the universe waits dreaming. For men must go where the flame winds blow, the gas clouds softly plating, where stars are spun and worlds begun, and men will find them waiting. The song that roars where the rocket soars is the song of the stellar flame. The dreams of man and galactic span are equal and much the same. What was he thinking of? Make your own choice. I think I came close to knowing him at that moment, but until human beings turn telepath, no man can be sure of another. He shook himself like a dog out of cold water and got into his bunk. I got into mine, and after a while I fell asleep. I don't know what Macready may have told the skipper about the Stoker, or if he tried to tell him anything. The captain was the senior ticket holder in the merchant service, and a good man in his day. He kept mostly to his cabin. And there was nothing Macready could do on his own authority. Nothing simple, that is. And the Stoker had saved the ship, and I think what kept anything from happening between Macready and the Stoker, or anyone else and the Stoker, was that it would have meant trouble in the ship. Trouble confined to our little percentage of the ship's volume could seem like something much more important than the fate of the human race. It may not seem that way to you. But as long as no one began anything, we could all get along. We could have a good trip. Macready worried, I'm sure. I worried sometimes. But nothing happened. When we reached Alpha Centaurus, and set down at the trading field on the second planet, it was the same as the other trips we'd made, and the same kind of landfall. The Lud factor came out of his post, after we'd waited for a while, and gave us our permit to disembark. There was a Jek ship at the other end of the field, loaded with the cargo we would get in exchange for our hold full of goods. We had the usual things: wine, music tapes, furs, and the like. The Jeks had been giving us light machinery lately. Probably we'd get 2 or 3 more loads, and then they'd begin giving us something else. But I found that this trip wasn't quite the same. I found myself looking over at the factor's post, and I realized for the first time that the Lud hadn't built it. It was a leftover from the old colonial human government. And the city on the horizon, men had built it. The touch of our architecture was on every building. I wonder why it had never occurred to me that this was so. It made the landfall different from all the others somehow. It gave a new face to the entire planet. Mac and I and some of the other crewmen went down on the field to handle the unloading. Jeks on self-propelled cargo lifts jockeyed among us, scooping up the loads as we unhooked the slings, bringing cases of machinery from their own ships. They sat atop their vehicles, lean and aloof, dashing in, whirling, shooting across the field to their ship and back like wild horsemen on the plains of Earth, paying us no notice. We were almost through when Mac suddenly grabbed my arm. "Look!" The Stoker was coming down on one of the cargo slings. He stood upright, his booted feet planted wide, one arm curled up over his head and around the hoist cable. He was in his dusty brown marine uniform, the scarlet collar tabs bright as blood at his throat, his major's insignia glittering at his shoulders, the battle stripes on his sleeves. The Jeks stopped their lifts. They knew that uniform. They sat up in their saddles and watched him come down. When the sling touched the ground, he jumped off quietly and walked towards the nearest Jek. They all followed him with their eyes. "We've got to stop him," Mac said, and both of us started toward him. His hands were both in plain sight, one holding his duffel bag, which was swelled out with the bulk of his airsuit. He wasn't carrying a weapon of any kind. He was walking casually, taking his time. Mac and I had almost reached him when a Jek with insignia on his coveralls suddenly jumped down from his lift and came forward to meet him. It was an odd thing to see, the Stoker and the Jek, who did not stand as tall. Macready and I stepped back. The Jek was coal black, his scales glittering in the cold sunlight, his hatchet face inscrutable. He stopped when the Stoker was a few paces away. The Stoker stopped too. All the Jeks were watching him and paying no attention to anything else. The field might as well have been empty except for those two. "They'll kill him. They'll kill him right now," Macready whispered. They ought to have. If I'd been a Jek, I would have thought that uniform was a death warrant. But the Jek spoke to him. "Are you entitled to wear that?" "I was at this planet in '39. I was closer to your homeworld the year before that," the Stoker said. "I was captain of a destroyer. If I'd had a cruiser's range, I would have reached it." He looked at the Jek. "Where were you?" "I was here when you were here." "I want to speak to your ship's captain." "All right. I'll drive you over." The Stoker nodded, and they walked over to his vehicle together. They drove away toward the Jek ship. "All right, let's